I'm Kimberly Martin. I'm the acting director of the Harriman Institute for this academic year, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this wonderful event today. For those of you who don't have past experience with the Harriman Institute, it's one of the world's leading institutions, world's leading academic centers for the study of Russia, Eurasia, and Eastern Europe. And Central Asia is a very important focus of our work. And I'm particularly grateful to Professor Alexander Cooley for the really entrepreneurial role that he takes in bringing Central Asian-related events to Harriman. I want to highlight two upcoming events related to Central Asia that we have on our calendar for this spring. Tomorrow, Thursday, at noon, we will have a seminar in the Marshall Schulman Seminar Room, room 1219 in this building, by Edward Schatz of the University of Toronto on the politics of America's changing image in Central Asia, which is his current book project. And then on March 6th, Marlene Laroule and Sébastien Pérouse of George Washington University will be joining us for another brown bag seminar, also at noon, in the Marshall Schulman Seminar Room on the 12th floor. And on March 6th, they'll be speaking about the Chinese question in Central Asia. I also want to remind you that on April 18th to 20th, we will once again be hosting the annual convention of the Association for the Study of Nationalities, the ASN convention, which will have a number of panels that focus on things related to Central Asian events, including a panel that will be a critique of Alex Cooley's new book, a critique and a celebration of Alex Cooley's new book. It's a real honor that his book was selected for this, from Oxford University Press, called Great Games, Local Rules. And we're especially grateful today for the support and the cooperation of the Central Eurasian Project of the Open Society Foundations. We have had a number of things that have been done cooperatively with them recently, including a capstone seminar taught at SIPA last spring, where the Open Society Foundations was the sponsor of the project and invited the students to stay on afterwards to continue to work on a working paper from the research that they've done from that program. And so we're just delighted and very grateful for this opportunity that they're providing us with today, and we hope that it's just one of many cooperative events in the future. So welcome, and thank you for coming here.
Kim, thanks so much for those words of introduction. So I'm Alex Cooley, and I'm absolutely delighted to also welcome you here, and sort of this unique opportunity for me to wear a couple of different hats in the welcoming, that I'm a professor of political science here at Barnard College at Columbia University and at the Harriman Institute, but I'm also a member of the advisory board of the Central Eurasia Project. And so I think the two interests converge in an interest in how the external world interfaces with Central Asia. Is it possible for the external community not only to affect change in Central Asia, hopefully for the better, but to get an accurate understanding of what's going on in Central Asia? I think when we talk about countries like Uzbekistan, which is on the closed side of the spectrum, we've all too often, I think, succumbed to not only sort of dated information, but I think dated assumptions about political processes, social processes, economic challenges. And the idea behind the session today is to try and get some updated information, insights, analytical perspectives from people who understand the country, understand its trends, have been on the inside, and are keen observers. And this is where our distinguished lineup comes in. We converge around the issue of rights, individual rights, and we're going to study the issue from a number of perspectives, right? Of course, classical political rights, human rights, but also social rights, looking at youth and migrants, economic rights, trying to examine the economic situation there at the moment on the domestic front. And then we're going to, in the second session, take it up a notch, right? Because Uzbekistan is not just worth studying in terms of what's going on internally. There's also a regional dimension and international dimension. Very briefly, the regional dimension is its relations with its neighbors, which continue to be tense and uneasy. Questions of the borders, questions of the enclaves, the perennial issue of the water issue, and how it's going to be handled, as well as other perhaps more hidden issues. The question of migrants and their status in neighboring countries and how that affect Uzbekistan's relations is something I think we'd like to consider at some point. And then finally, there's the international dimension. And this, I think, is quite significant now. There is there's, I think, some very structural, fundamental changes going on in Central Asia. And it's difficult to say for certain what initiated them, but ever since the summer, dynamics are changing. For one, you see Russia playing a much more focused, I would say, aggressive role in the region, especially in its decision to back Kyrgyzstan, offer military support and assistance, create a unified military base, also a new military arrangement with Tajikistan that includes a new quota on migrants and so forth. Russian decisions to invest in hydro plants in Kyrgyzstan, which, as you all know, breaches a real red line that Russia has not crossed before, in part because it was very concerned about managing its relationship with Uzbekistan. So we have this structural situation on Uzbek borders. On the other hand, we have NATO's withdrawal from Afghanistan under the 2014 deadline, and that's led to renewed sort of speculation about reverse transit deals, NATO cooperation. Those of you who saw the Mark Kramer piece, David Kramer piece in the New York Times, looked at perspective from London, Berlin, and Washington, saying that the Uzbek government had approached each of these NATO powers wanting left-behind military equipment in exchange for reverse transit rights. So what we're looking at is the potential involvement of external powers in the Central Asian region in a way that isn't of itself necessarily causal, but might exacerbate regional tensions, local tensions, and we want to sort of really identify those advocacy issues and flag them. Very final thing, I think many different times as social scientists and as advocates, we have assumptions about things like theories of change, about the use of things like naming and shaming tactics in human rights, or the sort of informational campaign of the Cotton Campaign, which I hope that we'll discuss in the context of the second panel. And I think we want to challenge some of those things today, not necessarily undermine them, but what we really want to do is ask ourselves, are these traditional strategic tools of the outside world, are they having an impact in Uzbekistan? Or might they even be counterproductive? Would it matter if we had a change in regime, right? Would the Cotton Campaign be more successful? Would Human Rights Campaign be more successful? I'm not sure what the answer to those questions are, and so I'm really eager to hear from you and learn from you. A very final procedural point. You will see a camera there, and we're using microphones. This session is on the record, right? And I'm just saying that this is part of our goal here at the Harriman Institute. It's a public knowledge function. The speakers, their presentations, the Q&A are all going to be recorded, digitally archived, become part of the Columbia knowledge stream. So just please bear that in mind if you have a question or a comment today. So I've talked enough. Welcome, and let me hand it over to my CEP fellow board member, chairman of the board, and also Columbia colleague, although he's at the law school, Scott Horton. Scott.
Thank you. Yes, the law school is indeed part of the university, even if some people there don't think so. What we'd like to do in the first panel is attempt a scoping of current recent developments in Uzbekistan, and I think in part we have something of a media coverage problem with Uzbekistan. I'd say we get sort of blips and flashes of things that get pulled out and discussed in Western media, and they're interesting. They catch broad attention, but they don't really allow us much of a survey of what's going on in the country. I'll just give you some examples. If we do a search for feature reporting on Uzbekistan, what comes up? First position is probably fashion. Certainly that's the case in New York City, which may sound odd, but we get the personality of Gulnara Karimova, a true member of the global glitterati, a singer, a designer, a jewelry maker, and also a person very frequently mentioned as an aspiring successor to her father. So she is a controversial figure in her own right. And here in New York, of course, she attempted to stage a Fashion Week event, which was boycotted, denounced, picketed, and got top bill coverage in boulevard newspapers here. And actually, that was picked up and carried around the world. That was one of the most read stories in the West about Uzbekistan in the last year. We might call it the fashion misadventures of Gulnara Karimova. And that ties closely back to another point which Alex just mentioned, which is cotton, the manufacture of clothing with Uzbek cotton, and labor conditions surrounding cotton, a far more earnest matter, which has gotten persistent, serious coverage, especially in Europe, I'd say, in the German-speaking world, in France and in the UK, a little bit less in the United States. But it's picked up. There's been a public boycott movement. So that's probably the second area of broad coverage that's been consistent. So I think there's a broad perception that there's some persistent, difficult rights of the child and labor rights issues surrounding Uzbekistan's principal export cotton. Then the next would definitely have to do with Afghanistan, not directly, but the importance of Uzbekistan as a staging point. And this is figured in media coverage from many of the members of the NATO alliance. In Germany, for instance, a very heavy focus on Air Base number 3 in Termez, and debates in Parliament about this, the desirability of having this connection. And more recently, the piece that Alex mentioned, but a piece that's also been echoed in reporting in the last few days in the UK and in reporting in German media about the role that Uzbekistan will play in the drawdown from Afghanistan. And that, simply put, is, of course, you can take goods out by air, but there's a tremendous cost associated with that. So if you want to remove them efficiently, you need to find a land corridor. And given developments, although most of these goods came in through Pakistan, given developments in Pakistan, that is an increasingly unappealing corridor, and that forces a re-examination of routes to the north, and that in turn has led to a refocusing on Uzbekistan and what sort of arrangements need to be done with Uzbekistan to use that corridor. So I think we've seen a bit about that. We're likely in the course of the coming months to see a lot more about that as this becomes an issue for military planning, an issue that potentially involves very, very large sums of money. In the business world, if we scan business reporting, we'll note that Uzbekistan constantly comes up as a source of conflict and problems in the telecoms area. So we've seen one scandal after the next relating to telecoms operations there. I would say there doesn't tend to be a lot of in-depth reporting about why that's so, but the fact of that is constantly in the news with different service providers, Swedish, Russian, for instance. The human rights area also has been a regular source of reporting, not quite, certainly not as high profile as we had in the period immediately after the Andijan incidents, but nevertheless, I'd say a sort of steady flow of reports and information about human rights issues, about conditions affecting the professions, the legal profession, for instance, about the way trials are conducted, about the treatment of political opposition. And then finally, I think we do have a few pieces here time and again, which take more of what I call a political science perspective on the country and look at the question of succession. The idea that Islam Karimov is not immortal and his term will come to an end, voluntary or not, and we will have to have some sort of system for transition to a new government. And what is that likely to be? And what can we infer about it from the news reporting we do see out of Uzbekistan today? So I think there's certainly among area experts and political scientists a good deal of speculation on that. So those are just some high points. So now we have a panel with a great deal more in-depth knowledge about conditions on the ground in Uzbekistan than I would have to offer you. And we'll hear from them sequentially. I'm not going to give full introductions for each of our members. We have the biographies in the program notes that are attached. But we'll proceed down the list here, and we'd like to start with Shadida Tulaganova, who is a well-known journalist and writer, person who's been connected with a number of important exposés that have come out of Uzbekistan, and someone who also keeps her eye on the cultural side of things in Uzbekistan with a twist.
I don't cover fashion. Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you very much for inviting me for this conference. It's a real pleasure. The Uzbekistan is collapsing. The country's economy is reached the point where there's no cash. There's no cash, there's no local currency available, there's no foreign currency available. I have an impression that there's not even money in a state budget to run the country, and I personally think nobody really cares about it. So to summarize, there's no money to run the country, and there is very little money left to steal in the country, which is probably the main preoccupation of the Uzbek political elite at the moment. So how does this political elite respond to this crisis? Is, from my observation, is simply by diminishing or making the circle of those people who are allowed to make money or steal money even closer. And access to Uzbekistan resources is always is divided strictly and between regional and political groups, and everyone pretty much knows the terms of engagement. And I'm not going to go into details here which group controls what, but I have to mention that the most lucrative parts of these resources, meaning the foreign currency exchange in the black market, railroad transportation, border trade, are controlled by the individuals or groups associated with the National Security Service. Erosion of the political system is, from my point of view, is coming from the erosion of the economy, is been there for a while, but what's happening now, it's accelerated by the fact that the US president is aging and probably will die one day or another. And there is no mentioning or any hint of who is going to succeed him. And that creates nervousness within the elite of where to go next. And here is, we have the guess game, but it doesn't mean, it doesn't help anyone, because people, the key people in the government don't know what's going to happen to them next, meaning personally, not to the country. Everyone is now talking about their personal well-being. So the reaction, the natural response of these people are to steal more, to shift money abroad, and possibly to get a helicopter to ensure that there is a safe exit in the case of unforeseen circumstances. So it looks very pessimistic and grim, and we don't have really any options. Who are the possible successors? Scott named one, Gulnara Karimova. I personally think that her father would like her to succeed, because this is the person he trusts, unlike other people in the government who've been with him for a long time, but he doesn't trust them. She will, even though he would probably like her to succeed, I don't think she is a good candidate for the rest of the elite, because she is also a competitor in this very limited market of resources. She is greedy, unpredictable, and there's no guarantee that if she comes to power, they're going to keep their positions of controlling certain aspects of the economy. So she is not an acceptable candidate in this case. And also, she doesn't have a power base. She doesn't have a group of supporters. She relies pretty much on herself. And she's as good as long as her father leaves. And then God knows what's going to happen to her. Given that, I think that she might be a beautiful president and, you know, quite glamorous. You have to look at positives. She's doing yoga. And the widespread rumor circulation now, which I personally don't believe, is that if she becomes the president, then Alisher Usmanov, a Russian oligarch, is becoming prime minister. What are the chances of this? Yes, probably. But then the situation is even more pessimistic because we have this glamorous woman in a face-down yoga position and a convicted rapist as a prime minister. So where we go from there? Any chances that the situation is going to explode one way or another is very unlikely. The protest population, I mean, the people who might go and protest are mainly busy working abroad in Russia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, you name it, making money. In a way, also supporting the regime. We Uzbeks don't like to protest much, so you know, you can't really expect that. And more importantly, there is no force inside the country. I'm not even talking about opposition. I'm talking a force to organize this group of people into some coherent movement and ongoing protests. And in this situation, we're going to face another Andijan, and everyone understands nobody wants it to happen. So I believe that any transition, if it ever happens, might likely be a Turkmen scenario when the president dies. In our case, there's going to be a National Security Service, the ultimate organization which controls the whole country, decides who is going to be the next person. And everything is going to be done quietly, pretty much. Or it's going to start a big fight with unpredictable circumstances, in which case the country will go to absolute dogs. So in any case, no matter what happens within Uzbekistan, who comes to power, nothing is going to change anyway. What I care about is not what happens to the people like Rustam Azimov for prime minister or Gulnara Karimova. What happens to the country? And since the current political elite doesn't care about it, the thinking is more about stealing, stealing, and stealing, the thinking about where this country moves next and how to reform it has to take place outside of Uzbekistan in one way or another. So I mean, the opposition or the groups who are like professionals would have to come together and start thinking about how to reform this country, give the agriculture, economy, gas, or whatever. If this doesn't happen, then whoever comes to power, be it like, imagine a visionary who might appear as a messiah to save the country, which is very unlikely, or a person coming in coup, they would have to do something. So the organizational thing, a third force, has to be formed outside of Uzbekistan to save the country from complete disaster. That's all.
Thank you, Shahid. So next we're going to hear from Alisher Siddiqov, a name that's going to be familiar to all of you who follow press reporting on Uzbekistan. He's the director of the RFERL Uzbek service.
Sorry. Right. So I was asked to talk about youth and migration. I think, in my opinion, these are two very important subjects to talk about. Youth, who are these? Who are the Uzbek youth? It's if you take the composition of Uzbekistan's population, you'll find that 46% are the youth below 24. If you take 30, it may go up until 60%. So targeting the youth is very important. Whatever you do politically, whatever you want to do in terms of media, in terms of marketing, whatever you do, you target youth in Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is a country of youth. So that's why when we talk about stupid things what Karimova is doing, like Twitter, everybody guess, oh, she's stupid, you know. No, she's not. I mean, if you take the, if you get the impact of her activity, you'll see that she's really targeting particular group, which will be, in case of her, she doesn't need probably their votes. It's pretty much decided without any elections. But the support for the next term would be really crucial for her, because some experts believe that in dictatorship it's easy to take over the government, but it's harder to hold it. So now this is one thing. But what are those youth doing in Uzbekistan? First, lots of them are unemployed. These global tendencies not bypassing Uzbekistan. This high unemployment among youth. They're also very much becoming cosmopolitan. They're also looking into new possibilities around. So, but the first possibility for Uzbek youth is to go abroad, of course, all the time. As soon as you graduate from university or as soon as you finish your school, the first thing you're gonna do in Uzbekistan, because economy is very much in trouble, you try to find your living abroad. So this is number one issue in Uzbekistan. The outflow of this of labor created a situation when we have probably, there's no concrete estimate, but probably over 88 million youth and young people abroad living primarily in Russia, South Korea, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and other countries. But what happened recently? So what we are covering at this point, which is very much important at this point, on January 18th, Karimov made a historic actually shift from the current policy, where from one side he is not able to provide youth with jobs. On the other hand, during the cabinet meeting, President Karimov stood up and said, "What the hell are youth doing abroad?" So he said, I was watching Russian TV, NTV, and I heard the report that Uzbek street cleaner was killed in Russia, in Moscow. Probably if you would watch Russian TV or follow Russian news, you would see that every day dozens of Uzbeks being killed in Russia. But he's like kind of, for the first time, he's learning that from Russian TV somehow. And he's asking the interior minister to deal with the issue. So he says, where are you looking? Why are they going abroad? Why are they cleaning streets abroad? Don't we have our streets in our country? So this type of talk. And from that point, I realized that something will happen. Something will start from. It's not an empty statement. So, and the day before yesterday, just before I flew to New York, we broke the news that for the first time, Uzbek police is stopping Uzbek migrants to go to Russia abroad. It's a major thing if it continues this way. It's one of the things that some call could create disturbances. Will lead to some further escalation, tension in the society. So police is stopping migrants, primarily laborers, going through Kazakh territory. So through Kazakhstan on buses, and like cars. So and they're demanding them to have a work contract. What the hell, work contract? You know, it's just these laborers would never work with work contract. Means if it's happening, that already the decision is to stop migration. Why Karimov is deciding that? You know, there are three aspects in my opinion. First, Karimov knows that the regime will end or will have that Karimov knows that the biggest threat to the regime is those migrants actually. First, they're going abroad, they're outside his control. And the regime dictators, they want to control everything, including minds of people. So they're outside of control. They listen to Radio Free Europe. They openly criticize the regime during our programs. They have free internet abroad. And by time, they're becoming more more independent in terms of, economically independent. So they're earning some money, so they're gaining capital. So this is one negative thing for Karimov, that he's very much afraid to lose control over big portion of population. 30 million of population, imagine 8 million, at least 8 million is abroad. The second reason, Karimov really looks what happened throughout last year with labor migrant scandal in Russia, when Russia started playing this card of Central Asian migrants. When the scandal broke out regarding Tajik migrants, about pilot scandal, so they started to kick out migrants from Russia. They couldn't do it. They will never be able to do that. But for Karimov, this is another labor migrants in Russia, but particularly in Russia, they are his kind of a weak point. So Russia may play this game if they want. And Karimov knows about it. And the third, and which is also another possibility, is that the Interior Minister was very happy to hear that, because that will open another big corruption channel for police to get bribes from these labor migrants. So this is the major trend, and we should look into it very closely. The second bigger trend was it's all connected with migration, with the youth problem. The second biggest trend is Uzbekistan's monetary policy, where they totally banned cash exchange in Uzbekistan. They banned the circulation of foreign currency, primarily US dollars, and that is with the next step in this policy will be banning remittances. So all remittances will be transferred automatically into Uzbek currency, and on very low rates, so which is set by central bank. So this is another. We're talking about billions of dollars per year just from Russia. Uzbekistan receives more than $4 billion per year. It's more than Uzbekistan earns from gas, from gold, from cotton altogether. So it's a huge, all this money goes to ordinary families, and every family has at least one labor migrant. So this is imagine a country where pensions are so low you will not be able to buy fruits, or maternity allowances are canceled, or if you want to get one, you really have to prove that you're dying, or all kind of social benefits that came from Soviet times, they were canceled. So that's why the privilege is either you have somebody in the police, or in the tax authority, or you have a labor migrant abroad. So for my family, I'm a labor migrant abroad. So this is another major trend that we're looking at. It's a monetary policy. What is going to happen here will be very crucial for the nearest future. Talking about youth, I think the decision, the ultimate thing that we can do at this point is to inform and to keep people informed about what is this policy, who is behind this policy, what future you may hope for. So we are, as a Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, for ourselves, we see the light in the end of this tunnel. So I don't want to say that our radio is jammed, where that our website is blocked, our proxy sites are blocked, we're not allowed to work there as reporters, we're not allowed to have our bureau, we're not allowed to travel there. So, and I see the light in the end of this tunnel, and the solution is this. I'm not getting any money from Samsung to promote it, or from Apple, though my colleagues really think so. Lots of Uzbek youth are really started to get information, which is really going beyond this hatch, beyond all these, blockages that government try to do. So the only thing that where government is really impacted is when things are becoming really discussed in the society. They don't want it, but they feel that they have less control over information. So that's why what we do in Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, we're a very small team, but we increasing our daily visits to our site constantly. Since last year, we increased to 100%. It's a daily 23,000 people daily comes to our site. We work with the latest tools, latest distribution tools, latest technology, latest circumvention technology for internet. We're offering that. So from our journalistic perspective, this is what should be done, and what should be done in a very bigger way. Last year we launched, I know that we're short on time, but I really want to talk about it because it's important. We launched, for the first time, we launched live interactive political show, which we called Online. It's a 2-hour show on the most important topic, on the most important development in Uzbekistan, where everybody can call into studio and express their political opinion for the first time, live. They're using Skype, where we're not allowing telephones, to express their opinions. And that created a lot of impact already in the society. All these things, what I mentioned, it's currency, migration, language issues, all these things are being debated openly. And the feedback that I'm hearing from our sources in the government, that's really the annoying factor at this moment in Uzbekistan. The monetary program on monetary policy in Uzbekistan was heard by central bank chief himself. The decision to cut cash transaction came after 2 weeks after this program. So we feel that the impact that media can create is maybe the last thing that is possible at this point. And another light in the end of this tunnel is the youth. Again, the idea that Uzbek youth are useless for change, in terms of change, I don't buy it. I think there are a lot of possibility, a lot of smart, resourceful, bright youth in the country. However, what happened, and this is exactly where OIS can help us, is that since 2005 Andijan events, when all international media organization and all international human rights organizations left the country, these youth that would potentially could bring the change into society, they left just, they're there, but they don't have any possibility. I myself, I graduated from Oriental Study University in Tashkent, and as a student I came to BBC, and they said, okay, yeah, let's try it. So I think there is some there is some good when actually you can come to some organization and you can become somebody. But now it's no longer the case. Just 3 months ago, I had really good citizen journalist in Samarkand region. He's very bright, very good guy, and he provided us with the news in Samarkand, what's happening there. Yep. And he always wanted to work for us, but I said, wait a second, we don't have money yet, so we cannot employ you now, and I don't know how can I get you some money from other organizations probably. So that guy called me 1 week ago from Russia. He said he's already in the construction work, so he's a laborer. So this is how we lose our youth, you know. Those bright guys, resourceful guys, we just give them out to this work. So, and I think we need to have an organization which can, very good structured organization, so we can combine all these resources, our youth, for the future of the country. Yeah, so.
Thank you, Alisher. So next we're going to hear from Sanjar Umarov, who is a very important commercial figure in Uzbekistan, who led a movement for transparency and battling corruption, was arrested, fell into all sorts of difficulties with the regime, and now has come to live here in the United States. But he continues to be one of the best observers of the scene, and I think with a particularly good depth of comprehension of the commercial sector. So, Sanjay.
Thanks to Harriman Institute to organizing this event, to Open Society Institute and Foundation, and thanks for all participants and especially panelists to pay attention to this very important matter. So our activity, political activity, I mean, was started just a few months prior Andijan event, and then Andijan event happened in Uzbekistan, and after some time I was arrested and spent 4 years in Uzbek prison, 2 years in isolation units, and so. But what I want to speak, it's about economic and business climate in Uzbekistan, because it's very important for development, it's very important for human rights, because property rights is one of the fundamental rights which may lead to even to life, threaten to the life, threaten to the freedom, etc., etc. And because this very important matter, and because my bad English, I'm sorry, and I like to read my statements. Overall, the business and economic climate in Uzbekistan has not undergone any noticeable change over the past few years. I mean, in good sense, in good direction. If we were to speak about the new regulations regarding currency exchange, which began on February 1st of this year, one could state with certainty that they do not serve for economic growth or development of private enterprises. And they do not envision the free exchange of currency. Uzbekistan was and remains still one of the few countries of the world where the so-called currency black market still flourished. Such a situation, as is well known, creates a real possibility for personal riches for a select category of official personage, workers of the law enforcement structure, government employees, and financial organizations. And if at the beginning of February, at the city markets, which have become the main location for underground currency exchange, one could not find speculators, and rumors were spreading about their arrests in great number. Now situation returned to as usual, and the black market speculators with bundle of Uzbek soms openly offering to exchange them for other currency on the black market. This lamentable situation is seen in agriculture too. Under immense pressure of state officials, which repress the actions of farmers, dictates to them what and when they will plant. This has led some agriculture producer to give up their plot of land. For example, in the Chinas region of Tashkent Oblast, dozens of farmers have quit their farms. As a result, in last year, more than 1,000 hectares of land left the agricultural sector only in one district. For Uzbekistan, with her abundant workforce, this fact is scandalous. People are already tired of government tyranny, tired of the situation where they work hard and receive only pittance. Therefore, abandoning their home place, the people are going abroad to search for bread, to earn at least something. To maintain a huge governmental apparatus along with its cartel-like structure, money is needed. And there is never enough of it for government, apparatus. Therefore, every year, more and more mandates are issued with advantage for investment of foreign capital. And then foreign investors arise with their money and put into production and begin to receive a profit. Those profit and business are transferred to the government. This has happened to many American, British, Russian, and Kazakh companies. Much is written about situation with MTS, former Uzbekistan. Even in Uzbekistan, there is no need, I think, to add anything here. All is very, very well explained in the media. One can say what their robbers have only their own interest in the mind. MTS had over 6 million subscribers. Almost 1/3 of the Republic's population has been left without mobile phone service. But robbers are not concerned about these minor details. Concerning Telesonair, there is little information available inside Uzbekistan. And scandal with Telesonair do not touch her local subsidiary UCell. One can say that overall the business and economic climate in Uzbekistan remain difficult and dangerous, and is awash in corruption, crime and governmental dictate. So this is short, but this is true. And maybe I would like to add something during discussion, and maybe now time to you, sir.
Thank you. So now we'll hear from Steve Swerdlove, who is with Human Rights Watch and has written a number of very interesting reports. So I think we'll hear a summary of the human rights situation.
Yes, thanks, Scott. Thank you to the organizers, OSF. I just want to say it's great to be back here at the Harriman Institute, where I studied, and Professor Sinnott, who taught me Uzbek, and to be surrounded by so many experts on Uzbekistan that I work with almost daily. Despite the title of this morning's conference, Uzbekistan in a Time of Uncertainty, one thing is absolutely certain, which is that the human rights situation is atrocious. And in several key respects, it appears to be deteriorating, such as what has happened in recent years with the legal profession. What I'll aim to do, because so many of you are familiar with how bad Uzbekistan's human rights record is, I'll try to just touch on what are some of the latest trends in the last year or two or three, and then try to move over to a few recommendations about what sorts of engagement on the part of the international community would be realistic, including what NGOs can do, other actors can do. So to start, as my fellow panelists know, civil society in Uzbekistan is increasingly isolated, increasingly tiny and beleaguered, and there's a sense of abandonment about the situation, that despite the growing engagement of Washington and Berlin and Brussels and London with on security matters, that somehow that engagement is not bringing any improvements to the human rights situation, despite hopes of that happening, that somehow a larger security footprint in Uzbekistan would lend a hand to independent civil society, and that has not happened. Torture remains endemic in Uzbek police stations and prisons, and it really affects thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people that have had interactions with the law enforcement system in Uzbekistan, whether it's becoming a prisoner, being interrogated, or some way interacting with the security services. Torture is rampant. It's been called as such by UN bodies for years, and we did a recent report on this that found new evidence of torture. So we often hear, as Scott mentioned, media blips about prisoners being boiled alive. This was a famous, iconic case that happened in 2002. But unfortunately, sadly, what our report shows is that torture is not a thing that happened 10 years ago. It's happened, in fact, quite recently and continues to happen. We see authorities continuing to intensify their crackdown on civil society activists. In 2012, numerous incidents of house arrest being placed on peaceful activists, trying to make the most marginal public demonstrations. We're talking 2-3 people going out onto the street, immediately being placed under house arrest, simply for holding up a placard that says, we want free elections. Persecution of religious believers in Uzbekistan is a systematic human rights abuse, not just of the majority Muslim population, but of Christians and Jehovah's Witnesses who are persecuted simply for practicing their beliefs outside of strict state controls, meeting in private, in groups of 3, in your home, simply possessing literature, carrying a Quran, wearing a beard. All those things can lead to arrest and arbitrary detention. We know Freedom House ranks Uzbekistan as one of the worst of the worst. Transparency International places it at the very bottom of the corruption list, and Reporters Without Borders labels it a nightmare in terms of freedom of expression and the ability to access the internet, and for journalists in general. I mentioned public protest. The largest, of course, as Shahida mentioned, in recent memory, or maybe not so recent, is Andijan, and there's still no justice for a massacre in which hundreds of Uzbek citizens were killed. Government-sponsored forced labor of adults and children in the cotton sector remains a serious concern. I'll try to mention a few things about that because we have some new research on that. 2013 marks 11 years now since a single UN special procedures. Special rapporteur was allowed into the country. And I did a little recent research on this to see where Uzbekistan stood in the records of cooperation with UN bodies. And it's quite interesting. Uzbekistan has not allowed more experts into the country than even Iran, Burma, Zimbabwe, and yes, even Turkmenistan. So Uzbekistan actually takes the cake in the record of denials to special rapporteurs. We're calling this now 11 in 11, 11 rapporteurs in 11 years. And again, as I said, despite this increasingly defiant record of violation of human rights, the EU and the US appear to be getting closer and closer with Uzbekistan. It's a difficult relationship, we know that. But we see military deals, we see sanctions being lifted. I mentioned human rights defenders. Sanjar Umarov knows very well that there are over a dozen human rights defenders languishing in jail for no other reason than their legitimate, peaceful work. One of them is Agzam Turgunov. I just want to humanize this a little bit by mentioning a few cases. One is he's a lay public defender, a guy who would go into court with ordinary folks who were facing the justice system and needed a defense, not necessarily a lawyer. He was arrested, and during his interrogation, boiling water was poured onto his back when he refused to sign a confession in 2008. So that's a more recent case of torture. You have writers, you have journalists in jail. In January, a year ago in January, Muhammad Bekjanov was just about to get out of prison. He had served 13 years. And just days before that happened, he was sentenced to another 5-year term, which is another trend we see. We see the extension of sentences of long-term prisoners, both religious prisoners and political prisoners, who are effectively serving life in prison, 20-year sentences, and dying in prison. It's also important to note here on human rights defenders that the releases of human rights defenders have trickled, have slowed to a trickle. If during the sanctions period after Andijan, the period that the EU and the US both had restrictions on Uzbekistan, there were maybe 25 human rights defenders released between, let's say, 2005 and 2008. There were roughly 7 or 8 in the years since, in the years of cooperation, engagement, constructive engagement. And that's troubling. In March early last year, 2 foreign correspondents were not allowed into the country simply for visiting, one from the BBC, one from Russia's Novaya Gazeta. And then an NGO worker was also summarily deported from the airport when she tried to enter in November. You see incommunicado detention of civil society activists. During the height of the cotton picking season, a well-known activist named Uktam Pardayev was simply disappeared for 15 days. And we believe it was because he was going to report on violations happening during the cotton harvest. You also see extraterritorial human rights abuses. This is something that's really hard to research, probably deserves resources to do better research on this. But in February 2012, a long-term exiled imam living in Sweden named Abidhon Kari Nazarov, there was an assassination attempt on him. He's barely alive. But the chief prosecutor of Sweden said at that time that he believed that this imam, that his assassination attempt was connected somehow with Tashkent, which may be the first time that on the territory of Europe you had the activity of Uzbek security services in such an act. And RFERL has done a lot of reporting on this in particular. You also had an activist in France, Nadezhda Tayeva, very well known. The Uzbek state TV put on a 20-minute documentary about her, disclosing her whereabouts, her address, her location, calling for her extradition. These are resources that are very seriously directed at getting people from abroad and bringing them back. I mentioned torture, so I won't go back into that. But forced labor. I want to leave some time for recommendations. We saw a new trend in the cotton harvest this year, which was a shift away from the youngest kids picking cotton, being forced to pick cotton. We still saw children as young as 9 being forced to pick cotton, but there was largely a shift towards older children, meaning 15, 16, 17-year-olds, and adults, government workers, nurses, teachers. who were, of course, threatened with the loss of their jobs, their pensions for not participating in the cotton harvest. And even though the involvement of older children still categorically is prohibited by international law, and forced labor itself is a violation of human rights, this was a sign that pressure may have been working, that the Cotton Campaign, the attention to this issue, at least in a sort of twisted way, pushed Uzbek officials to change their behavior, at least in their perception. If they could reduce the numbers of young kids out in the fields, maybe that would solve the problem. So I think maybe there's a bright spot there. It shows that pressure seems to have an effect. The EU's position has been shockingly weak. Catherine Ashton took a trip to Tashkent and the other Central Asian nations not long ago, and her statements on human rights were shockingly bland. And this despite the fact that the EU had placed sanctions on Uzbekistan and very clearly outlined criteria that needed to be met in order to establish enhanced relations. The US, a year ago, very troublingly, the Obama administration exercised authority that Congress had granted to it to lift restrictions on the sale of military assistance, different forms of weapons to Uzbekistan. And this really may not mean that guns were transferred to Tashkent, but it sends a terrible message to civil society about the emphasis that the United States places on the relationship, that it's really all about security, or in large part dominated by that. And so, recommendations. Do I still have a few minutes, Scott? So Alex asked me to present some realistic recommendations. This is very difficult to do. We talk about engagement. The word, I think, at Human Rights Watch, what we talk about is principled engagement. What does that mean? We don't, we're often accused of advocating isolation of Uzbekistan or just naming and shaming, sanctioning. But I think what principled engagement means is it's where certain sober realities are acknowledged in public by public officials in Washington and Brussels and other places, and where there's a willingness to impose consequences and live up to the standards enshrined in legislation in Congress and the Foreign Affairs Council of the EU when measurable improvements are not made, when they're not forthcoming, when the political will is clearly absent, then there have to be consequences, or else all the rhetoric means nothing. And there's also a pragmatic consideration here. There's not just international human rights. There's not just the moral arguments. There's the idea that there are 30 million, as Alisher presented so well, there are 30 million Uzbek citizens who really should be the audience, should be the target of US and EU policy, not just one man and his clique. And I think, as you've made so clear, Alex, in your scholarship, what makes the West different in its interactions in the region, what sets the EU and the US apart in the great game, is the stated objective, at least, to promote democracy and human rights. So that's where the emphasis has to be, at least in as much as security is promoted. So what are the recommendations? Pursue a more robust human rights policy through a variety of initiatives. So change the public diplomacy, make sure that every possible opportunity in public in Tashkent, or when the foreign minister comes to Washington, make uncomfortable speeches that will make the Uzbek government mad and irritated by mentioning specific human rights abuses. Tweet about those issues when you're visiting Tashkent if you're John Kerry. I was going to say Hillary Clinton. Go back to the restrictions that were enacted in Congress in 2004 about torture, about accountability for Andijan, and mention those, and make sure that those are more integrated into the overall relationship. Mention the human rights criteria in the EU at every possible opportunity. Make sure that those are at the center of negotiations. You have the annual bilateral consultations, which are a two-day meeting that occur between the US government and Uzbek officials every year in Tashkent. And human rights is the last segment, the fourth segment, the least important segment. Make sure that's up front. When you visit Tashkent, if you're a US official or an EU official or any official, meet with the families of imprisoned dissidents. Not just civil society activists that are laboring away, but the families of prisoners. Try to more prominently feature their cases. As I said, be prepared to impose policy consequences. This doesn't mean that Human Rights Watch is saying sanction Uzbekistan, but I do believe that floating the word sanctions, the dreaded word sanctions, can have a real effect. Floating the word travel ban, asset freeze is important. When you're running foreign assistance programs in Uzbekistan, insist on non-negotiable parameters of those programs. That means independent lawyers, independent journalists, independent civil society activists should take part in those programs. They are the beneficiaries of those programs. And quite often what happens is the Uzbek government sets the rules of the game and only invites Gongos to be involved in these programs. Throw your weight more clearly behind reestablishing access for Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, the BBC, to get back into Tashkent, because as much as we want to see Uzbeks coming on exchange programs to the West, and how that is extraordinarily important, those are often reserved for folks that are from more elite segments of society who have learned English, studied English. There are stories that have to be witnessed and told in Uzbekistan. We have to get back. There has to be, I think, a concerted effort to be on the ground in Tashkent. And finally, recognize the leverage you have. When Germany pays 25 million euros a year to maintain the Termez base, it has leverage. Money talks. There's often this fallacy that after 2014, our hands will not be tied. We'll be able to more freely negotiate with Tashkent and push Uzbekistan around because we won't need the transit out of Afghanistan. I'm not saying that's entirely untrue, but I think there's a fallacy there because the money that is being spent and invested and given to this regime now creates leverage. It has to be used more effectively. And finally, list human rights abusers in the Uzbek government publicly. We saw the Magnitsky Act was just passed. It certainly led to some complications in U.S.-Russian relations. But I really believe that if Rustam Inayatov, the head of the SNB, was named in some sort of list, that would send a very important signal that the SNB has long been implicated in torture. Therefore, they're not going to be welcome if they travel to the West, even though we don't see him traveling much anyways. But it's an important signal, an important message. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. So now we're going to open up for questions and discussion with the panelists. I'd like to invite those of you who have questions to step up to the microphone. It's right there. We do need to be able to capture the voice for the recording, so I'm afraid you just can't stand in place and speak. And please identify yourself by name and institutional affiliation. And while we're getting ready to do this, let me just put a question first to Shahida and Alisher, because I noticed in your presentations maybe a bit of a point of conflict, because Shahida, you said that you didn't believe that Gulnara Karimova had a natural constituency, and Alisher, in your presentation, it looked to me like you were saying she's aiming to develop a constituency among the youth through use of social media and things of that sort. So I'd just like to get your comments on that issue. And then also, she's the perennial candidate, the name that gets mentioned all the time. But who are the other figures you see as potential contenders to succeed an ailing and ultimately mortal Islam Karimov?
Shall I start?
Please.
Okay, Uzbekistan, on one hand, is very difficult, to analyze politically, but on the other hand, it's extremely simple. So you try to dig, and you're definitely going away from the reality. So everything on the surface is what is true in the most of the time. Throughout my journalistic experience, what I've seen, it has been like that. If you see that Gulnara Karimova is trying, means that there's already a decision. Like in the most cases, everything in Uzbekistan, what is on surface, you should take it more and work with that rather than going deep. If you go in deep, you kind of misleading yourself because there's no such great thinkers behind it, possibly, According to our poll on Gulnara Karimova, which we posted in August 2012, when we've seen so many activities and campaigns from her behalf, she's done almost everything, and whatever she does, it's all this PR campaign, which you think, why would she need? She's gaining a lot of popularity among youth in Uzbekistan, among all layers, even intellectual youth, in the government, those who work in the government, everybody tries to touch the will-be leader, you know, will be to be closer, to defend her. She has the most Twitter followers from I think from the whole Central Asia. She has the biggest number of Twitter followers. So according to our polls, again, let me take it correctly. No, 48.9% of our listeners and readers believe that Gulnara Karimova is trying to become a president. So whatever she does, she's trying to become a president. Knowing her ambitions, that she tried lots of things in her life, starting from karate and ending with design. This is in her character to try to become a president. Her song to Father, I Love You, Daddy, which if I would be Karimov, I would get it as threat. So it's another indication, and her latest statement that when she was directly asked about her ambitions, she almost certainly said that this is within the framework of her ambitions, that she cares about those ambitions. But one thing in Uzbekistan which is important is that the time really you have to win the time. So now she's on the top, and she must act now. She doesn't know what happens after 1 year, 2 years. Things really change in Uzbekistan very drastically. Everything can turn upside down in 1-2 years. So that's why I Love You, Daddy, and that's why she's trying to she's very hasty. She's already so the moment for her to be president is now. If you consider like something happens now, some sort of election, or Daddy dies now, so this is her moment now. But again, if you talk about 1 year, 2 years from now, if Karim is still alive, we need to analyze by the time that period comes. But what we see now, she wants, and if now will be a chance, she's the president. So almost sure.
Sheeta.
Well, I totally agree that she is extremely popular within Uzbek youth, and for all obvious reasons, there is no one else to look for, and she projects this image of extremely successful woman. She is very good looking, and she's doing all sorts of things. In absence of any other role models for the Uzbek youth, yeah, this is the woman. And objectively, you look at her, she projects success. She is very determined. She is an achiever. No matter what we think of her, she gets what she wants. My point was that even though she's trying actively campaigning, I totally agree with Alicia. Her campaign started already, and she's really moving forward like an avalanche. Anything she does is very strong-willed. She still, I think, doesn't have a strong backing from the political groups in Uzbekistan. I would say that she would probably definitely become the president if the National Security Service, Inayatov, if he's alive yet, or anyone else, totally backs her up. If she gets the serious backing from the clans, or I don't really like to call these clans, but political groups, then she gets it. And in the context of Uzbekistan, no matter how popular you are within the public, doesn't matter. So anyone can support her, but at the end of the day, we know where decisions are made.
Okay. Alex?
Okay. So thanks to all of you for those presentations. Just a couple of just specific questions on your comments, one to Shahida, one to Steve. Shahida, you talked about how the fact that there's just no possibility for any kind of post-regime planning or even discussion within Uzbekistan, so it has to take place outside. And I was wondering if you had any sort of follow-up thoughts on that. And, is there a counter-argument to be made here about dissidents and activists who live abroad that perhaps start lose touch with what's going on inside? Would there be a problem of legitimacy if this planning starts happening outside? I call it sort of the Shalabi kind of syndrome, right? Where supposedly all these people speak on behalf of Uzbekistan and then they go back and they're ready to sort of parachute in and they have no basis of legitimacy. So how do you look at the sort of the tension between the practicality of having to do this abroad and then, you know, the legitimacy and currency that you have inside? And Steve, just you covered so much really helpful ground. I wanted to specifically ask you just what your thoughts are, having evaluated this in the EU and the US context of these dedicated human rights working groups and dialogues, right? So in the US case, it's part of the bilateral, which started as part of the strategic partnership, which, you know, goes from military technical to economic issues to human rights. And with the EU, it's part of sort of the engagement strategy. Seems to me one of the criticisms is that by just having these dialogues or these working groups, you just sort of throw all these sort of uncomfortable issues within these like closed, hermetically sealed conferences so that you don't have to address them at high-level meetings and so forth. So I wonder if you or HRW have any concrete recommendations about their utility, how you would restructure them. Is this something that you think should be on the agenda in Brussels and Washington to sort of, you know, fundamentally rethink these modes of engagement on these issues? Thanks to you both.
Thank you. Right. Yeah, that's a big problem. You cannot do anything inside Uzbekistan, and you cannot expect any helpful debate about what's happening in the country. Inside and outside, actually, we don't have opposition. We have some groups who claim to be opposition, but they represent certain segment of society or whatever, been outside for a long time, and actually they don't have any legitimacy. But it's not about legitimacy. They don't have plan or concrete proposals of what they're going to do when they come to power. Because at the end of the day, even they were abroad for a long time, they still listen to news, they still have people inside, like I have my contacts inside, Alisher has. And they have avenues to channel their ideas through, for example, Radio Free Europe or BBC or whatever, but they cannot offer anything to the Uzbek public. Now, they cannot offer anything to Uzbek youth, which is most important. Uzbek youth needs to know what is the future. The problem of legitimacy, everyone has got problem of legitimacy. The current government has a problem of legitimacy. As far as I'm concerned, they never been legitimately elected, none of them. So hey, we're on the same boat here. There are a lot of, thanks to the government who is trying to push everyone outside the country and work abroad, we have migrant workers who are the laborists, we have migrant workers who go abroad and work in banks and financial sectors, a lot of doctors. A lot of people who don't leave Uzbekistan, but they kind of have businesses abroad, like for example, even in Mongolia, Burma, and countries like that. We have a lot of human capacity and potential and expertise, local one, Uzbek one, to make this happen. It's just getting these people together and organizing them in some coherent group in a way they are not afraid, they don't need to be public or whatever, to actually step in and talk and be engaged in these things. The big problem is that there is no leader. We have serious issues with the leaders. And so far, there's no one who legitimate enough and well-standing ground figure who would say, okay, I'll take it on. So the floor is open. I will sometimes feel like giving an ad in a newspaper, desperately looking for leaders.
Steve?
Thanks for the question. Human rights dialogues, sort of a pet issue or obsession for us in recent years, because what we saw is what came out of the sanctions process with of the EU, sort of with the human rights policy, essentially boiled down to, at the very end of the day, was, look, we're lifting sanctions, but we have a human rights dialogue process, and that means we're constructively engaging and talking about issues. And isn't it good to talk? Isn't it good to see one another more regularly than we did during the sanctions period? And we're opening up a fully fledged EU diplomatic embassy, a mission in Tashkent. That's surely a sign that there's more of a conversation that can lead to real results. And the problem, of course, with the EU human rights dialogue and with the annual bilateral consultations, like you said, it turns into a human rights ghetto. I think most crucially, nothing is public. There are no public commitments made at the end of that 2 days or 3 days. So while there may be a town hall format, and I know the diplomats in Tashkent probably have to work extremely hard just to make those logistically happen, some of those meetings that include civil society activists, there need to be, for them to have any utility, there must be, as I was saying earlier, some uncomfortable exercises in public diplomacy that come at the end. There have to be some commitments made by the Uzbek side, and certain can also be made by the Western side at the end of those events. The town halls also, unfortunately, we've seen times when certain civil society activists that are deemed to be too irritating are not included by the Western diplomats, which is quite scandalous. We've seen a sort of, what I learned when I was on the ground there is that it wasn't just folks like me who could have their accreditation stripped. It was even the diplomats. So they are working under serious pressure, and there needs to be probably support from their capitals to promote their positions on human rights. And whatever, if they get deported for doing so, so be it. There has to be maybe a harder line on these sorts of things. Like I was saying, a non-negotiable line. I think, as I was saying, I think symbolism is really important in dictatorships. And if you were to put the human rights discussion on the first day next to security, that would be great. As I said, I think, when I think it was Reagan went to Sakharov's apartment before he went to see Gorbachev, why not try that in Tashkent? Go directly, not to Karimov, but to a dissident's house. And then we also see the human rights infrastructure of international organizations has been dramatically reduced in Tashkent. The OSCE had its mandate renegotiated in 2007 in such a way that now they are not allowed to meet with unregistered activists. That's a scandal. That can't stand. That shouldn't go on if you're responsible for implementing the human dimension commitments of the OSCE. That needs to be rethought. And so those institutions should become good offices of human rights, not simply project implementers on the ground. Because I think that's really contributing to a sense among Uzbek civil society that these institutions aren't doing much and not really working on their behalf.
Dan Sershin is the director of the Central Eurasian Project at the Open Society Foundations. Go ahead.
Yes, I am. And thanks to Alex and all the team at Harriman for pulling together this great event. Ali Sher as well, who Ilkhamov, our program manager on this, who did a lot of work. And thanks to the panelists and to Scott. I wanted to return to an issue that I think Shahida and Ali Sher Siddiqov most touched on most closely, but also Sanjar Umarov also mentioned, which is the issue of control, specifically the control of currency and the control of labor flows and migration. We've seen moves of this nature in the past, particularly on the currency front, and then slowly it's sort of as it's almost like, it's like the sort of pressure valve or the steam valve. They tighten it and then they slowly kind of loosen it back again. Sanjar's comments imply maybe that, particularly with the currency traders, that there may be a little bit of a move to open up the steam vent again and let off a little pressure. But at the same time, there seems to be a pretty fundamental, in terms of magnitude of this change, it's really substantial. If we are talking about 8 million migrants, and we are talking about restricting the ability of, $4 billion, I think, of hard currency to come into the country, at least.
Announced by Russian Central Bank.
Yep. That's big, and so I guess the question for me is, I wonder if all of you maybe, but especially Shahida, Ali Sher, Sanjar, could comment on to what extent this is a real grasping at straws by a regime that is kind of turning in on itself and finding whatever ways it can to grasp onto more hard currency and keep itself afloat and keep its lifestyle afloat. And to what extent this is more just sort of business as usual for the regime, in Tashkent, and if we'll see, as Sanjar maybe indicated, a little bit of a loosening of that, of the pressure that has been building. Thanks.
Who wants to go first? Alisher, do you want to start?
Karimov has always been like control freak, and the situation with currency, you know, if that happens, you know, it's what Shahida mentioned. So the state budget will all of a sudden will be getting a lot of money. So to support, you know, pensions, other things, you know, the government still, you know, the country still to have to function. So the fact that the budget is empty, that there's no money, you know, they kind of giving themselves a task from where else we can get this money, and they know that the gas they're selling by themselves for themselves, and it's always in offshore. It never gets back. No cotton money never gets reinvested into cotton production. Gold money again goes out, and this is not just empty thing. You know, you take any sector and you see that the money never comes back to Uzbekistan. So they now they know that the only place is labor migrants somehow. You know, when they want to leave, take something. When they want to come, get something. This is one aspect, but what will happen if policy continues? We're already seeing this happening. The door is closing from outside, means that people are very much frustrated with the situation inside, and they're making long-term plans to leave. So it's not only after 1 or 2 years, we will stop talking about labor migration. We will talk about totally migration. You know, so already people take their families and they settle in Novosibirsk, in whatever cities in Russia. Already, the common sense tells them, you know, the future of your kids is somewhere where there more liberty, more work possibilities. So what we will start seeing, and we're already seeing, it's that the migration will have a permanent character. And for human rights activists and other type of activists and journalists, what we've seen by now is that Karimov is driving them out so that the door is closed from outside. This is another reason why they adopted a new law on increasing the punishment for breaching the state borders. So it's now up to 12 years if you're living outside. If imagine you're a journalist, you're fleeing, or you're Uzbekistan, fleeing without exit visa, of course, which would imply that you already breached the border, and you will be convicted to up to 12 years. Kind of everything in human rights aspect, in activism aspects, what is being done is no man, no problem. You know, just driving everybody out and close the door from inside, so that you cannot come back. You're not suicidal. For the migrants, as I said, this is a huge money, but the side effect will be living forever.
I think this is a problem of huge apparatus. This Uzbekistan is police state, and there is a huge police, huge SMB, huge army, and huge hakims, apparatus, government peoples, and you should pay to them to have the control on the country. And they have a good salary, these people, because they will not work for a small salary. So he needs the money. So the money, all the money what they're receiving, it's not enough, you know, because too much spending. Spending is huge because of this was I think the main motive to start to find other source of money. There is a cash flow from migrants, so they tried to take this money. But then there is other also corruption side because of the difference in the currency rate in the official and unofficial. So there is a huge number of speculators, black market speculators, who link to this. There's other segment. There's speculators. There's police who covering other some kind of police who covering these speculators, and there is also the people who work in financial institutions, in the banks, etc., who also corrupt and who profit from this difference in the currency exchange. So I think there is some kind of the contradiction between these two fractions of the corrupt government cartel.
Totally agree with Mr. Umarov. Just wanted to shortly elaborate. This totally true that the security apparatus is very big. You have national security, police. You have a tax authority, which is also a part of national security service, and you have a prosecutor department, anti-corruption department, which is most corrupt department in the world. I mean, in Uzbekistan, anti-corruption department. So by creating lots of illegal activities, when majority of activity, business activity, moving activity, living activity, when so many things are restricted, limited, and illegal, you have a lot of corruption possibilities. So the whole security apparatus have to breed from this illegal activity. So it doesn't mean that you cannot do it. You can do it, but you buy when you do it. So it's very simple.
Can I just summarize quickly the mission impossible of the current government? Because they're trying to keep the country going just about. They're trying to make themselves personally very rich, and at the same time they have to keep this army. So where you get the money? The problem with the current situation is that they cannot sell cotton as they used to sell before. From what I hear from my sources is that from last year's cotton is still there. They couldn't sell it properly. Russians stopped buying gas as of autumn 2012. So they have although the Uzbek government is selling now gas to China, it just started and the quantities are not as big. So from Russians before they were getting like $3 billion a year, they don't have it anymore. So where do they get money? The migrant workers, that's all. They have serious issues to face and nobody wants to face it. So I'm just seeing the agony of the clinical death of the patients and nobody wants to pronounce it dead, basically.
I'll just add a quick comment about the foreign exchange issue. It seems to me that that's really an extremely important indicator here. And I started about 20 years ago teaching international business transactions here at Columbia. And at that time, when we were dealing with emerging markets, we would spend a large part of the course focused on how to cope with foreign exchange issues, how to secure licenses and permits that would allow the export of capital and profits. And indeed, in the transactional world, this was a major point of emphasis. And I'd say over a 20-year period, you can plot its sharp decline because it has ceased to be, largely as a result of pressure brought by the IMF, which has forced a normalization and a regularization of foreign exchange issues. And that's come to the point now where we basically dropped it from the curriculum. It's just such a rare point that we just don't see a need to incorporate it in the standard curriculum for emerging markets. And that shows how odd Uzbekistan is to have such a regime and to hold on to it so tenaciously, and what a real badge of kleptocracy. That's the proper word here. It is, because these sorts of foreign exchange regimes are nothing more than a means for those in powerful positions in government to privatize the state treasury. That's what it amounts to, and I think, observations and studies that have been done over a period of 20 or 30 years first suggested, maybe that's going on, and at the end they came to the conclusion, yes, that's definitely what is going on persistently in countries that adhere to this. And I think in the case right now with remittances, it seems clear enough to me, based on the presentations you made, that you've got a country right now whose economy is in a shambles, where the levels of immiseration are enormous, especially in the agricultural sector. And what has been the escape valve? I mean, the escape valve has been foreign remittances. It's people who go from the village to Russia, get a job, as cleaners or apartment attendants or whatnot, earn some money and send it back to their families. So that has been, I think, what has kept the country together, basically, has provided this trickle. So we've got a government right now taking aim at remittances. The potential political consequences of that move cannot be underestimated. That could be a truly suicidal act. So, not to over-dramatize it. So, next.
I have a couple of questions, comments at the same time. First, so
this is Alisher Ilhamov.
Yeah, Alisher Ilhamov. I'm working at Open Society Foundations. The one specific point in the Alisher's presentation, when you suggested there is some kind of shift of policies addressing the migrants. And I just wonder if indeed it's a real shift of policies. On the one hand, we see the reports coming, I think today or yesterday, that those police forces which were sent to the border with Kazakhstan were removed, and it's becoming kind of coming back to the previous kind of status, and also the fact that evidently the labor migrations keeps Uzbek economy afloat, which was actually already discussed, and so he probably needs to kind of to balance two kind of aspects, one against other. On one hand, his concerns regarding the security of his own regime, and some threats posed by the kind of young people who are being out of control. And at the same time, kind of those remittances. It's another kind of evidently benefit where the Uzbek government actually acting as free rider, doing nothing but benefiting a lot. So it kind of, if we could just again kind of to comment whether it's just for show or it was real kind of movement toward change of the current policies. The second point is concerning the, Steve mentioned the cotton campaign and the targeting forced labor. So the kind of against background of this kind of dim perspective of regime change, democratization, lack of plans, the strategies among the political opposition, there is certain kind of efforts to target not the regime, but certain policies. So the question is whether such kind of strategy which target not regime, but the policies within the current existing regimes may succeed or not. So if you could build some parallels, for instance, with other authoritarian regimes in Russia in the 19th century under this similar to some extent authoritarian kind of state, it witnessed some progress in terms of judiciary rule of law. In Germany also the rule of law came first, then democracy was second. So the question is the efficiency, the rationale of trying to change the policies from outside of the country. What is the limits? What are the opportunities?
So who wants to take that on?
And one comment. Yesterday, Shahida told that Uzbekistan has a real trouble now to sell Uzbek cotton. It was information she actually came out with thanks to her research. And it's interesting that this kind of some kind of concession the Uzbek regime made last season by kind of banning school children sending to school to cotton fields possibly was a result of this kind of problems with selling Uzbek cotton. So it's to some extent succeeding, but again, the question is how is this kind of changes in terms of policies is it sustainable or not?
Thank you. So Steve, you want to go first?
Oh, that's a big one. I think, on the one hand, we know that we're not dealing with rational actors. When you're dealing with, someone who's been in power for 23 years. But I think, Alisher, you used the light at the end of the tunnel, and I think in our work we try to always pay attention to whatever we think is actually working. And I think maybe to try to answer your question about policies, Alisher, I'd say that, I think it's about, the question is, does pressure ever work? And in what segments of the economy, of the political structure, has pressure worked? And one example is when Hillary Clinton went to Tashkent in 2010, and on the eve of her visit, she made a statement in Kazakhstan leaving the OSCE summit. She said she would, very clearly, she said, I will raise the issue of imprisoned human rights defenders with President Karimov. Very specific. And lo and behold, within a day, a human rights defender named Farhod Mukhtarov was actually released. That doesn't happen often, but maybe it's speculation, but I think it's possibly causal, and shows that there are moments when the Uzbek government is listening and they react, and they do react to certain pressure. And I think what I was trying to stress in my presentation, that the symbolism of what the West symbolizes, what it means, is as much leverage as the money or the military equipment that can be given. There's the idea that, of course, we know President Karimov wants to see Angela Merkel, he wants to see David Cameron, he wanted to see Obama at the Chicago summit, but those things are important and tangible, so to the extent we can in the civil society community, we should make sure to always link those opportunities, those events, and tie human rights demands to them. So I think that is true. I think the Cotton Campaign, as I was saying, I do think that there was this twisted sort of response to the Cotton Campaign, thinking that if we can reduce the numbers of young kids out in the fields, we can improve our reputation. And clearly, again, it does seem to be tied to a desire to not be downgraded in the report that is to be put out this year in June by the U.S. Trafficking in Persons report that the State Department puts out. There's a clear effort, and these negotiations are timed in such a way. We see the director of the National Human Rights Center, Akmal Saidov, getting very active, in the few months before these reports are supposed to come out, saying, we've done this, we've done that. We're about to host we're trying to invite the High Commissioner for Human Rights back to Tashkent, and we want to do an educational program for police officers. Aren't we, we're doing something, we're moving, and I do think that there are rare cases where pressure works. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now, because I think in terms of the historical parallels with Russia and agricultural reform, I'll just say that I do think that we often focus on civil and political rights in Uzbekistan because they're so stark, and they are the sort of prerequisites to other reforms and so crucial. But we have long wanted to focus more on farmers, on agriculture. I think it's at the very heart of change in Uzbekistan. So there needs to be a lot more done.
Anybody else want to offer a few comments on this? No? More questions, please.
Hi, I'm Muzaffar Suleimanov, Eurasia program at the Committee to Protect Journalists. My question first is to Alisher. You said that, as I understood, you have a certain dream of delivering the message to the Uzbek public inside the country. How do you do that, knowing that RFERL, as well as many other news websites and broadcasters, are being blocked and banned in the country? And when you have at least 4 journalists, according to CPJ research, being jailed for not less than 10 years. And my second question would be, I guess, to everybody, including well, Steve, you just mentioned Secretary Clinton's visit to first Kazakhstan and then Uzbekistan, where she, as I remember, said, "Oh, human rights are awesome in Uzbekistan," or something like that. The record has improved. My question is, how do you engage the authorities, which are, instead of trying to understand that they are harming themselves by putting journalists and human rights activists in jail, how do you educate them that actually if they release somebody, if they stop violating human rights, the West and the other countries will actually start cooperating with you? Thank you.
Yes, indeed, I have a dream. So, when I became a director of Radio Free Europe Uzbek service, just for your own knowledge, this is one of the most impactful and most media in Uzbekistan, working outside Uzbekistan. I was 26 years old, and the management, by putting the youngest director in the history of RFRL, thought that the only way to get out of the situation, current stagnation with the media, is to put somebody who would think innovatively. So the dream was, and it's already realized, is to send a message to our listeners throughout Uzbekistan. If their rights are violated, if they have some complaints, really violation by local authorities, so they have a telephone number or a Skype account, or telephone number in most cases, they can call to Prague, just give us a missed call, and we'll call them back. And the same day in the evening, that complaint, that person will be heard on the radio, and that local administrator will hear about himself on the radio. So it's like a very open type of, we call the program open microphone. That caused a lot of impact on the regional basis, on the regional level, because no regional mayor or administrator, governor, he doesn't want to appear on the radio as somebody who is, stirring the situation, because Karimov and his apparatus is also listening, and this is a great bargain for the apparatus to take out governor and to dismiss him and take bribes and put another one. So that's why local authorities, they don't want to be compromised on our radio. So that was a huge impact on local level. So that is the first dream. The second dream was to have as I already mentioned, to have an open debate where everybody could express their opinions on the most important topics. And I came up with this online idea. Already, this is just as simple. As I was talking to you, I have 6,000 people on my Skype. 6,000. Skype people is not the Facebook likes. These people are my citizen journalists. They're in all areas of Uzbekistan. They send all of kind of information. We can check to all information. Actually, I would want to ask Steve to stop campaigning on our behalf on our return. We don't want to return there. It's we already changed the journalism, where it's no longer a journalism you want to go there, but you're already virtually there all the time. While I'm talking to you here, I'm with my listeners there. It's always open. If they throw some information, the information will be directly put. I'm authority at this radio. It's not some secretary is dealing with these messages. It's I'm dealing with it. I take the information and I give to a reporter to work on it. So it's direct. So they know that this information is being processed in a very let's say responsible manner. So that's why there's lots of personnel. Personal, how do you call it? Touch to what we do. So everybody on our website can just click and talk to me directly. The other thing is these telephones. Really, people change the way they getting information, especially youth. There are lots of apps now that would allow you to go to get those to get information. And I find out that young people in Uzbekistan are very much informed what's happening. And if that continues, then we project that the mind will be changing gradually, because we're specifically targeting young audience. We're targeting the audience which we call a change agents, that in future who will be a part of this current government. So that is the long-term, slow, hard work. But this is, I think, the only thing that you can do in a peaceful manner, rather than bringing something, in terms of in the form of revolution, spill of blood. Slow, gradual change the mind of young people who get the information in a new manner. We have 86% of our visits coming from mobile phones. This is impossible. If you take the whole Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties, 26 services, including Iran, with millions of visits per month, we account for 1/3 of all visits from mobile phones, just from mobile phones. So that's why when we talk about MTS, for us it's very sensitive. We want MTS to work. Even UCell under Gulnara Karimova, let it be. The communication is the key, the new technology is the key which would bring changes in Uzbekistan. So that's my opinion, and that's how we should work with social media, with latest technology, we should come up with new apps that allow to go into our information without any restrictions. We should talk on Skype, on Viber, on new things. So that is how I see this bright future for you.
Can I just add a little bit of pessimism with bright future business? Just make sure that the government doesn't hear you talking about the mobile phone internet. Otherwise, they'll ban it completely, and you will have no access to your
We will come
Skype.
up with something else.
Something else. No, seriously, because this is the next step forward for them.
Just to, Muzaffar, your question is difficult. I mean, I think I should let Sanjar speak a little bit about the issue of how do you get human rights activists released? How do you persuade Uzbek officials that it's in their interests to comply with basic human rights, make even moderate improvements? I think what I've been trying to say is that the post-Andijan period, or actually more the post-sanctions period, let's call it, since 2008 and 2009 has shown us clearly there isn't political will to do that. There won't be a constructive engagement that leads to measurable progress. So therefore, it's not only about naming and shaming, it's about being very strategic. This year, the Human Rights Council will review Uzbekistan. In April, the Universal Periodic Review. There's the question of, does Uzbekistan deserve its own special rapporteur? Maybe it does. It is on par with Iran. I don't want to compare. I shouldn't say that it's on par with Iran, but I want to say that I think there's a growing recognition of the records it sets of non-cooperation. And so diplomats can think more creatively about using the Human Rights Council, things that haven't been done yet on Uzbekistan. I also think that there's this idea that Uzbek officials aren't listening. That they do, Sanjar's case is really illuminating. When you raise a case again and again and again and again, eventually it does matter. And Mutabar Tajibayeva, for example, is a good example of someone who was released at the sort of, not maybe the height of pressure of the sanctions, but in 2008 you had 8 or 9 people released at once. That's what we need to see again. When security negotiations were going on in 2002 regarding the signing of a strategic declaration between the White House and Tashkent. You saw the registration of Ezgulik. There was a tangible piece of progress right there. So what I think should be done is there should be conditionality on these negotiations about the military equipment, the transit payments. They should be tied to measurable human rights progress. Maybe you want to say something.
First of all, having this opportunity, I'd like to say a big thanks to everybody who supported my release from prison, and there's many people who was involved in that, I know, and also the stations, Ozod League, BBC, Voice of America, Uzbek Service was very active, and other institutions also, and thank you for that. And also, as I said, we started our active political activity a few times before Andijan event, and during Andijan event we was inside the country, and we was like in the epicenter, and many things happened at that time. And then I was jailed and spent also sometimes in the prison, and I saw also situation from inside, situation from inside, and I'm very happy that there is people who are interesting to that, and asking and inviting us, and asking this. We may tell a lot of things, starting from 2005, what happened, how, and what was made after during the prison time also, and also maybe tell a little bit the youth, about the youth, and about the yes, this is very important, and radio stations, especially shortwave, because to go to have a large audience now, this is only shortwave, except internet, I mean. But for the general population, especially to who suffer a lot, who, for example, lose relatives in the prisons, they do not using internet, they're using radio, and they listen radio, and this is shortwave radio because FM is prohibited. So, and this is why a shortwave, and information what you delivering, I mean, all these 3 stations delivering through shortwaves, they receiving, some station have bigger audience, and our station maybe not so big, but all 3 stations work on this is very appreciated, especially also with the people who inside, behind the bar, Maybe after lunch I will tell a lot about this. And yes, if you interesting to questions, we have the answer for some questions, how to peaceful change the power in Uzbekistan government. Because only waiting when he will die, I don't, it's he has very strong health. What I want to say, and the option like Turkmenistan, sudden death, it's impossible in Uzbekistan. This is impossible. Turkmen scenario. Syrian scenario, it's impossible because in Uzbekistan, in one day was killed 1,000 people. In one day. So it's impossible. It's just killing. Sorry. And Libyan also impossible scenario. because all is under control. All in Uzbekistan, all is under control. Political scientists cannot believe, but this is true. This is worst case scenario in Uzbekistan. So, and only possibility is if the government, influential country's government, will tell him, Mr. Karim, this is your last term. You should not re-elect next time. You should not. We will not tolerate this. Because if he will know what they will not tolerate this, he will set the power. Yes, he will set the power. He will think it. Because otherwise, there's a double standard. People of Uzbekistan, citizens of Uzbekistan, also want to live under constitutional democracy, where the people electing, but he do not listen people, citizens of Uzbekistan. So, but he listens the government. He listens the foreign governments. He listens this. Yeah, this is, and people of Uzbekistan, citizens of Uzbekistan, as the citizen of European Union, as the citizen of United States, also do not want what the Constitution broken. And why Western government meet him after he broke the Constitution? I do not understand. But even before they admit, okay, if he will break Constitution, we will tolerate this. No, zero tolerance. This is globalization.
I think maybe we have time for just one more question quickly, so.
Peter Sinnott, I think, Shahida, you've raised the most important point of leadership, and is that obviously leaders from 20-odd years ago do not suffice, and the problem for finding new leadership is that we have not built forums that can allow them to come to the fore. Now, the idea of a conference on the economy in Central Asia, which would have prescriptions, would be one of the most terrifying things that the Karimov regime could face. That is something that terrifies them. And the idea of human rights, quickly, I've been involved in several dozen cases on Uzbekistan alone over 15 years. I did a case last year, a pro bono. I won't say the name because it's on appeal. Here was a man who had been in journalism. He'd also been involved in NGOs. Arrest was imminent and he fled. He appeared in court. They didn't allow him to shave for 2 months, and he's in an orange jumpsuit. Over 40 hours the case went on in court, which is very rare for a political asylum case in New York City. This man, he didn't get it, he was turned down, and that happens a lot. You see, what we have the last 5 years, political asylum, is that you have imputed political opinion. You have somebody that says something at school, university, and that leads to arrests or intimidations and so on. So you're dealing not so much with party members of Birlik, Erk, or Kunduz, you're dealing with people who have imputed political opinion, because it's almost impossible to have direct political opinion affiliated with a party. So his name, a researcher on the staff of the Brooklyn Lawyer, found something very interesting on a Russian site, Zvrosky.net. And what it said, there was his name on a list of hundreds of people wanted. Now this is in Russia, and many of these are Russians, but the Uzbeks turn up. So in other words, the state, on some level, is actively promoting that certain people that they have targeted become onto these lists, so that even in a country where they might be seeking employment, like Russia, this will hang over them. So I think that we're dealing with a system that is much more solid and systematic in its work against its population. I believe the counterintelligence activities of the Uzbekistan government via the embassy and the UN mission here are never discussed. They set up organizations. Nobody writes about them. Nobody talks about the Uzbekistan initiative and their little form and all the questions it asks. You see, we're in a situation where our level of where we can discuss things here and get to a higher level, but we also know it never reaches the New York Times and the Washington Post. So we've reached a glass ceiling in Central Asian studies. The internet and in Uzbek, it works very well. We find out a lot from, you get blood from a stone in information, but we find ourselves unable to get through this ceiling because in the end, the State Department human rights reports are what a freshman in college would term paper as a cut and paste job. We see the same old things carried on for decades. I went into court last week on an Uzbekistan case, and I had to argue against the 1989 census. No, there aren't 5.5% Russians anymore. And they finally, I had to convince them. I settled for 1%, knowing that it's not that even. But this is where we stand. The State Department does not bring them over on visitors groups. It's scarcer than hen's teeth. You rarely see them. All these things, we go in different directions because that's how our government is. The difference between policy coming out of the US military towards Central Asia and out of State Department and other agencies is very diverse. So unless we can see a forum for how leaders can emerge, we end up with the old text that I learned Uzbek from, where we would feed these historical figures who studied in this court and then the evil, the Zulum, the tyrannical Shah, and then they fled somewhere to the next kingdom. And we're stuck in that phase now, but we're finding that the United States is often not the country they can flee to. I got to be in court. Bye.
You're dismissed, Peter. Thank you. And I think with that set of very interesting interventions, we'll take a break.